Hi everyone, good morning. We're a smaller group today, so please feel free to come in closer. We won't bite. What we have tried to do is we've tried to curate this panel really to touch upon key areas of UAE law that foreign counsel and foreign clients ask us about. So hopefully this will be an interesting session for you. I'm going to start off with a quick discussion on foreign direct investment in the UAE. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the UAE, in terms of incorporating a company in the UAE, it is a license-based system. So what that means is the company is incorporated with the licensed activities, and it is permitted to carry out those licensed activities, and it should not act or conduct business outside of those activities. Now, companies are licensed either in the free zones, of which there are over 40 in the UAE, and Saurabh will touch upon the free zone regimes later, or alternatively, companies can be incorporated onshore in the UAE, which is anywhere outside of the free zones. Now, prior to the changes in law that took place, as some of you may be aware, there was a restriction on foreign investment in these companies onshore in the UAE. Foreigners could only invest up to 49% in an onshore company. You needed to have a 51% local partner involved in that company. And of course, that caused a lot of concern for foreigners looking to invest in the UAE, because ultimately you don't have control of the business that you are investing into. So when that restriction was removed, it was really a landmark time for the UAE. The restriction has now been removed in its entirety, which means that foreigners can invest up to 100% in onshore businesses in the UAE. And each Emirate level department, economic department, has been given the authority to determine the percentage of foreign involvement in the licensed activities. And it really has changed things, because what it's meant is that you now have foreign investment in sectors such as retail, agriculture, industrial sectors, and we at Afridi and Angel have incorporated many companies with up to 100% foreign ownership, and we've also restructured a lot of groups to remove the 51% local partners, and Saurabh again will touch on that in a little while. I must say, though, there are a very few strategic activities, as they are called, and those activities are activities in the area of banking, finance, those types of sectors where you need to have UAE national involvement. And it is up to the relevant Emirate level authority to determine that involvement. So it was really a big change in the UAE when it comes to foreign investment onshore in companies. I'm going to pass over to Saurabh now, and I've mentioned briefly, Saurabh, the free zones in the UAE, and perhaps you could elaborate a little bit more on the popularity of those free zones. We know that investors used to previously go to the free zones to get the benefit of 100% foreign investment and participation in the company. Can you just tell us a bit more about the popularity of those free zones now that we have the ability to have 100% ownership onshore?
Thanks, Daniel. So free zones are very much popular right now as well. Though they do have to reinvent themselves, because now even outside free zone, 100% foreign ownership is allowed. But free zones in general, you always had 100% foreign ownership. You have the advantage of being closer to similar type of business communities. For example, in free zones like Dubai Internet City, Dubai Media City, where all similar sector businesses were all together. Free zones sometimes have better corporate, free zones have their own companies laws. So sometimes those companies laws are more sophisticated than the federal companies law. For example, they allow for different classes of shares. So you can play around a little bit with structuring in case there are some joint venture arrangements in place. Then certain free zones allow for custom-free border. For example, if you are in mainland UAE, and if goods are coming in, you have to clear customs when the goods come in. But for example, if you are in Jebel Ali free zone and you're leasing a warehouse, goods can still come in without clearing the UAE customs border. So that's like an advantage for trading businesses who are based in Jebel Ali free zone. One of the issues which is now coming up is UAE came out with corporate tax last year, which came in effect few months back. Free zones were understood to be tax-free for like a 15 to 50 year tax holiday, depending on which free zone you were. But now with the corporate tax coming in, people have started to realize that it's not 100% tax-free, depending on your business model, depending on who your customers are, depending on in which free zone you are based. You may be subject to the federal corporate tax. So that area is very much in discussion regularly in terms of whether free zones still offer that tax-free holiday, which most people consider it to be. Other than that, free zones are trying to reinvent themselves, and they are in discussions about coming out with laws equivalent to like common laws as opposed to a civil law jurisdiction, which UAE is generally considered, just to give more protection, more comfort to foreign investors in terms of precedents and English law concept laws. Yeah.
Thanks, Saurabh. And Yogesh, could I now ask you to talk a little bit about your practical experience? I know you spent some time in Jebel Ali Free Zone in the UAE. Can you tell us a bit about that and your experience there?
No, thanks, Daniel. Hi, thank you. So, no, definitely, it was a very practical and flexible kind of approach which all the free trade zones follow. I had an experience of working with Jebel Ali, which is part of JAVZA, coming under the parent company of DP World. What we could see that while there's a lot of flexibility on any kind of licensing, there was a lot of flexibility of hiring foreign nationals, which could be very, very different to other parts of the country where there could be restrictions to hire a lot of UAE nationals also. Similarly, the way they function in terms of any kind of dispute resolution, that again could be very, very different. For example, besides, say, the Jebel Ali, DIFC, one of another free trade zones, they have their own laws. They bring in a lot of laws which could be related to very much, known to the UK people specifically, wherein that brings a lot of knowledge how any kind of dispute resolution will be dealt with. Similarly, Saurabh spoke about the no corporate tax kind of a scenario. There is advantages of no customs duty being paid. The profits are freely repatriable. It's 100% investment which is allowed. So coupled of all these kind of advantages which are very much available in any kind of a free trade zone, and Jebel Ali being one of the oldest kind of a places, that brings a lot of advantages to any foreign nationals to come, invest, and then take back their money also, which is very, very flexible to be taken out, besides the local laws, which could be very, very stringent. So that's a kind of comparison which could be drawn, and that's an advantage which a free trade zone bring above the local laws of UAE.
Great, thank you, Yogesh. Yogesh, we're back to you again. We're going to move on to look now at the topic of data protection in the UAE. And again, I know that you had some experience working in this area. Could you elaborate on that for the audience a little bit,
Thanks.
please?
So, data protection laws was introduced in 2021 in UAE. They had a different date of enforcement, and very recently they started working around the executive decision. Now, very similar to what we are expecting the law to be framed, already framed in India and to be introduced very soon, there's a lot of requirement for the privacy of the customers to be maintained. From a perspective of the company where I was working, which used to deal a lot into customer database, there's a lot of apprehension that once the law is made operational, how will actually the company manage all the database, which could be in different pockets, different functions, which could be collecting the data at one side, and equally the way it's being stored. So the UAE law is also very, very stringent when it comes to the privacy of the customers. So while there are stringent penalties which are there, there's a lot of practical things which the company was supposed to take in terms of various kind of steps to ensure that while they maintain the data which is not getting leaked, but equally the data is being stored in UAE. If you want to take it outside of the UAE, again there are a lot of questions, there are challenges. Net and net, the company needs to ensure that the data is very well protected, looking at the privacy of the customers.
Thank you, Yogesh. I am now going to touch a little bit on ultimate beneficial ownership regulations in the UAE. And this is a topic that commonly comes up when people are looking to incorporate a company in the UAE, and they ask about what information on ultimate beneficial owners is made publicly available. Now, the legislation on ultimate beneficial ownership in the UAE comes under the anti-money laundering law, and it really came about because of the UAE's desire to be part of the Financial Action Task Force. And the Financial Action Task Force actually evaluated the UAE and carried out a report on the UAE in 2018 and 2019. And in 2020, we had the ultimate beneficial ownership regulations which were brought in. Now, what they prescribe is that they require information to be provided by every company to its relevant regulatory authority on any individuals holding, directly or indirectly, 25% or more of the shares in that company, or alternatively, any individuals who have voting control of the company, i.e. through the ability to appoint the board of directors to the company. Prior to the regulations coming in, various free zones were already collecting this information, but the regulations made it more of a uniform process across the UAE. I must add, and it's a common question that we get, the information that is collected by the relevant free zone authorities or the onshore economic departments is currently not made publicly available. There is the ability in the regulations for the regulators to share the information with each other and, of course, ask licensees for additional information on ultimate beneficial owners. There's, of course, the obligation on the company to make sure that the information it's submitting is up to date. If the company gets a request to transfer shares in the company should investigate as to whether that leads to a change in ultimate beneficial owners, and if it does, to report that change within 15 days to the relevant registrar. Now, the regulations apply to across the board in the UAE, with the exception of the financial free zones of the Dubai International Financial Centre and also the Abu Dhabi Global Market Free Zone, and that's because those financial free zones have their own specific UBO regulations in play. The regulations don't apply in the UAE to government entities. So it is really a step towards having, that information recorded somewhere and reported to licensing authorities, but as I say, currently not publicly available. there is even an onus on the company through its management or through its liquidator to maintain ultimate beneficial ownership information for a period of 5 years after the dissolution of the company. So there is that obligation there. And Saurabh, I'll pass to you now, and I would like to ask you to discuss the topic on economic substance in the UAE, and if there is a concept of economic substance.
Thanks, Daniel. So UAE is becoming more stricter and stricter. During the same time period when UBO regulations came out, UAE also came out with something called economic substance regulations. This is the same time period where a lot of other offshore jurisdictions like British Virgin Islands, they all came out with similar economic substance regulations. Now, UAE was used a lot, still being used by corporate houses where they set up a trading entity in the UAE and they try and book profits in that entity because of the zero tax flexibility which was available. So in 2019, UAE came out with economic substance regulations, which basically requires, as the name suggests, you have to show some economic substance in the UAE if you are a UAE-based business. Now there are 9 activities which are covered under the economic substance regulations. I'll highlight one of the activities which is important, keeping in mind how people used UAE as a trading hub, is something called a headquarter business. Now, it doesn't really mean that your company must be a headquarter of your group. Even if there are group company transactions happening, that will get covered under the headquarter business. So for example, if you're buying from your group company and then selling it onwards, that means you are carrying on a relevant activity and it can get dragged under the headquarter business. If you are carrying a relevant activity, then you need to show substance. And how you show substance is the company needs to be managed and operated from the UAE. That basically means board of directors need to have physical meetings while they are in the UAE. Other than that, you must have employees, you must have office space, basically to show substance. All these companies which are carrying on a relevant activity are on an annual basis required to file certain notifications and then reports confirming that how they think they are showing economic substance. In case they fail to, in government's view that they have failed to show substance, there are heavy penalties which are being levied. We have seen companies getting fined because of failure to show economic substance in the UAE. Other than that, there are other activities such as holding company. So if you have a company which is holding other shares in other companies, that's also a relevant activity. Although for a holding company business, the directed and managed aspect is not required to be shown as substance, but you still need to have employees and office space, and there are other substance requirements which are still required to be shown. So that aspect of using UAE just to book profits of group companies to avoid paying taxes is at least as per the law, is no longer available. People are still trying to figure out how to comply with the economic substance and still have a tax benefit related structuring in place.
Thanks, Saurabh. I am now going to touch upon commercial agency in the UAE. So, we've looked at setting up a business. How do we do that onshore? Can we set up in a free zone? Is that still an appealing option? But what about if you don't want to have a corporate presence at all in the UAE? How do you distribute goods into the UAE? And commercial agency and the regime has really been a pillar of commerce in the UAE since the law was enacted in 1981. And the law has been amended a number of times, but actually last year it was repealed in its entirety and replaced with a new law. And this law provides that a commercial principal must be a UAE national, a company wholly owned by UAE nationals, and it also now makes provision for a listed entity to act as principal. Now, the law acknowledges that that listed entity won't necessarily have 100% UAE ownership, but it must have at least 51% UAE ownership in order for it to act as a principal under a distribution agreement. And we expect supplementary regulations to be issued on how that will work in terms of a listed entity. Now, interestingly enough, under the new law, what it prescribes is that an international business can also act as a principal under the law. And again, there are going to be further implementing regulations which are brought out to supplement this addition to the law. Now, the law states that for an international business to become a principal, that international business cannot be proposing to supply any goods which are currently supplied in the UAE market or which have been supplied in the UAE market historically. Now, a lot of people know that with the old law, termination of a registered commercial agency contract was extremely difficult. Under the new law, I mean the old law I should say as well, was extremely principal friendly. And so foreign investors again were nervous about how if they got into an agency agreement and if it was registered, if they wanted to terminate, could that even be possible to do that? Under the new law, termination is, it says that first of all, it says that the agency agreement will expire at the end of its term. In terms of terminating, there is the right for either principal or agent to unilaterally terminate the agreement. And we haven't really seen how that will work in practice yet, because what the law prescribes is that no current commercial agency contract can be terminated until 2 years after the enactment of the law. So that will commence in June 2025. We'll start to see how that termination provision works. There is also a carve-out for agency agreements which have been in force for over 10 years or which have had 100 million dirhams more of investment put into them. So obviously the big commercial agency contracts in the UAE, they cannot be terminated for a period of 10 years after the enactment of the law. So again, we're going to have to wait to see how that termination provision will operate for the bigger commercial agency contracts. The agreement still has to be in writing. There is the default for disputes to go to the Ministry of Economy, which is the ministry that deals with commercial agency, and then to the UAE courts. However, a difference under the new law is there is the ability to include an arbitration clause under your commercial agency agreement. Yogesh, I'll turn to you now, and I know you had, under the old law, some experience with commercial agency agreements. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think to begin with, let me try and differentiate the way India system works and what's happening in UAE. So for example, today in my company, we give dealerships. Now, each of these dealership is a contract in itself, and say for example, within Delhi, I have 7 dealers. And pan-India basis, I have 400, 500 dealers. Each have their own terms and conditions, and we can decide to progress or terminate as per the mutual terms. As compared to that in UAE, the concept is that for a particular entire place, you give one distributorship agreement. And they in turn may appoint any number of people who are going to actually run the show. Now, this involves a lot of investment under one single agreement vis-a-vis the company, and which at times, specifically in the old law, turns out to be very, very difficult kind of situation, specifically for foreign nationals. Now, when I was in Dubai, we faced a challenge where for certain ethical reasons, we had no choice but to terminate our agency agreement. And given the fact that under the previous law, they had a lot of advantages, it's very tilted towards the agents. Suddenly, we realized that we were in the court litigating against these agent who was one of the big UAE nationals, and very soon the licenses of the company were suspended. Because the company couldn't actually prove on the ground the reasons that why such kind of step was taken and what was the material reason for such kind of a drastic step against an agent who would have invested in the company for the last 25 years, and there were millions of dollars which were at stake. So very practical kind of changes now in the new law which have been introduced. There are changes which have been brought up to actually possibly bring in the concept of a term also, within which after a period parties can decide to part ways. So according the investment can be done. There are different arbitration prospects which have been introduced as compared to, say, the UAE law, which was the previous law, wherein the parties are possibly more known that what kind of an outcome could be there or how do they actually approach the arbitration. So these are definitely the welcome changes which are coming up. That brings more kind of flexibility to the foreign nationals also, and plus the foreign companies, to while ensure that they are in the right hands through an agent, but equally they may also become a distributor by themselves also, which was not the criteria earlier. So welcome changes, and I'm sure definitely with the period to come, this will make the foreign investors' life much more easy.
Yes, absolutely agreed. Thank you, Yogesh. We're now going to move on to look at corporate structuring in the UAE. And Saurabh, if I can ask you, can you tell us a bit about, we touched upon FDI earlier and structuring from that perspective. In your experience, is there a sort of preferred structuring route for foreign investors looking to come into the UAE?
So earlier, if it's a complex shareholding arrangement, a lot of time investors used to use offshore companies like British Virgin Island companies to structure their arrangement. But nowadays, Abu Dhabi Global Market, one of the free zones of the UAE, has something called ADGM SPV. This is completely based on English law concepts, enforcement. If you have written certain things in the shareholders agreement, you would expect those to be enforced the way it is intended by the parties because of the English law concepts available. And it's a very cost-efficient way of having a holding company. So a lot of time now people have the ADGM SPV as a holding company where the investors come in, where they have their shareholding arrangements. And under that, they have the operating company, which is really the intended business. That way, all the disputes get taken, are handled at a sophisticated jurisdiction, as opposed to at the operating company level, where the laws may not be investor friendly. Now, other than that, since the change of the FDI laws, now a lot of UAE companies where 51% was owned by a UAE national nominee, all the foreign investors now are looking at buying those shares back or getting the nominee to transfer those shares back to the foreign investors. That has brought its own challenges because some didn't have proper contracts in place, so enforcing or getting those shares back is becoming a little bit challenging. But at the same time, a lot of foreign investors have been able to take those shares back from the nominee sponsors. So that has also is in progress right now, is happening a lot in UAE these days. And the third aspect from structuring point, which I would like to highlight, is the tax aspect. Until now, tax was not even a consideration in deciding where to structure or how to structure in the UAE. But since the corporate tax, like I mentioned earlier, it depends on your business model and depends on which free zone you are. Investors need to now consider tax as one of the important aspects before they decide where to actually set up their business in the UAE.
Now we have some more material to cover, but I think we're going to stop now just to see if there are questions, because I think that's about 10 minutes, is it, that we have left of this session? 5 minutes, before we get kicked off stage. So does anyone have any questions, or would you like us to continue for 5 minutes?
Hi, good afternoon. Hello. Is it audible?
Yes, that's
Yes, so I have this one question. I'm like Isha Chakravarti, in the General Counsel of Controllers Data Centers Limited in Cloud4C. So vis-a-vis, this entity incorporation in the free trade zone, which you've spoken about, is there any, like in your experience, if you could offhand guide on the fact that in terms of asset ownership or leases, like if you have a company in the free trade zone, are there like restrictions for like having leases for a land which is not in the free trade zone? Is that aspect clarified, or how does that work?
So, okay. So basically, if you're in a free zone, your question is whether you can have assets outside.
Correct.
So technically in UAE, you have these 40 plus jurisdictions for incorporation, right? Consider them each as a separate country for the purposes of incorporation with their own laws. Now, if you are a company based, let's say in Jebel Ali, then you will be able to have long-term leases from the Jebel Ali Free Zone Authority, which itself, while it's the regulator, also acts as the landlord. But if the Jebel Ali Free Zone company wants to lease a premises outside of the Jebel Ali, then they will have to set up a branch or a subsidiary of that company in whichever free zone or other emirate of the UAE they want to set up. And then based on that license, whether it's a branch or a subsidiary license, they will be able to lease another premises. So it's basically consider Jebel Ali as one country, and then if you are going outside to any other free zone, you set up another presence, and then you can lease an office or a warehouse or any kind of facility in that free zone.
I think I would just add to that a very quick statement that applies across the board in terms of doing business. I mean, in the free zone, you are meant to conduct your business within the boundaries or the territorial limits of that free zone. And so there is not a strict rule around what that actually means, but that is the general concept. So if you wanted to then conduct business or have premises, etc., outside of the territorial boundaries of that free zone, you should, as Saurabh's saying, have a license in the other jurisdiction.
Thank you. Thanks.
We have a question.
Hi. So I have a very, very basic question. So, you said that in the free zone, if you set up a company, then there are these corporate taxes which are coming in. And I understand that, the main advantage why people were looking at setting up companies in Dubai, UAE was, the tax reasons. So now this corporate tax is coming in. And do the people have choice? Now you're talking about having a company in the mainland. And mainland earlier was a restricted zone where, you needed sponsors. So, free zones were attractive. But now if you don't need a sponsor in the mainland and the investment is open there as well, then why should anybody go to a free zone where you have corporate taxes vis-a-vis, mainland where you don't have taxes? Does a person have a choice or, other
Yes.
qualifications there?
So there is a time period before, during which companies are restructuring, trying to look at their business model and see whether, even if they are in a free zone, if they are still required to pay tax on their business, then they're trying to figure out, do they need to move to a different free zone, which will give them the protection of the tax-free jurisdiction. If you are outside of the free zone, then tax is applicable. But within the free zones also, some free zones are, for example, Jebel Ali, it's like a gated free zone, right? It's like a custom-free zone. Versus, for example, a free zone called Dubai Multi-Commodities Center, where it's not a gated free zone. It's easily, people can walk in and walk out. So people are considering whether moving from one free zone to another free zone will give them the tax-free benefit which they are ideally looking at. If it will, then people are planning to move to that different free zone. But the issue right now is that laws are still developing, right? Tax laws just came out. Every week, new clarifications and circulars are coming out. Public consultation papers are being issued. So it's still an evolving area. And it might change as and when more clarifications are coming out. Things might change in coming months.
And
just
thank
to
you.
add to that, besides the tax aspect, for any investor, There could be multiple other factors also to be considered. Repatriation of profits, hiring of foreign nationals, 0% customs duty. So there are multiple factors where anyone will consider to take into account where they want to be situated.
That's exactly what I was just going to add as well. You know, you might want to be in Jebel Ali Free Zone because you have that access to the ports, because that is key to your business. Or Dubai Airport Free Zone because you have goods coming in and out from the airport. And you want to also maybe be close to similar businesses, close to your competitors, where your customers expect you to be. So there's also commercial reasons as to why you would, you might want to be or remain in a particular free zone. And of course, tax is one element of that.
Thank you.
And the tax is 9%, right? So it's still, compared to other jurisdiction, it's not that high. I think that's the bare minimum required to satisfy the OECD requirements.
Sure. And you saying in the mainland there is it's only in the free zone that's tax free. Otherwise, in the mainland there's always a tax.
Yeah. So mainland there is tax. Obviously, there are certain thresholds which smaller companies are not required to pay tax based on their certain thresholds. Free zones will depend on your business model, which free zone you are in, what type of customers you deal with, and there are various factors. You need to show substance in the UAE if you are trying to claim tax benefits. So there are a lot of factors when you are in a free zone. And those assessments companies are doing these days to figure out whether they'll be able to claim this benefit or not.
All right.